Hi everybody, my name is Chris Kender and welcome to another edition of FAQ. This week we are starting a new series, having looked at Jeremiah last week and some of the challenges of our emotional health and how to deal with lockdown. This week we're starting a new series and I want to kick it off today with the theme of knowing who you are in lockdown. I don't know about you, but my life has radically changed since I am in lockdown. I'm no longer getting on a bike, going on a train, zooming around London, visiting various people. I had an international role. I was supposed to be on planes and at conferences, meeting people, speaking in front of crowds. My life is nothing like that anymore. And when our lives change, sometimes that has a really big impact on who we see ourselves to be, our identity. And knowing who you are is so important in changing times. And that's something I'm wrestling with on a daily basis. So I thought I would go and look at a part of the Bible where the believers, people that trusted God, had exactly that same challenge. And we're going to look at the lockdown experience of Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Those four Israelites who were taken into exile by King Nebuchadnezzar and many other people too, taken with them, and how they lived in lockdown. How do they find a sense of who they were when everything around them was changing? I find the book of Daniel incredibly inspiring and challenging, and as we dig into it this week, I hope it's a blessing to you. I'm going to read to you from Daniel chapter 1 verse 1. In the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. So that's a big deal, because the people of God understood themselves to be the chosen people. They could do whatever they liked because they were God's people. With God's on your side, there's no one that can come against you. What do we always say? If God is for us, who can stand against us? And so this idea that King Nebuchadnezzar, the greatest superpower leader of his day, think Vladimir Putin meets Donald Trump all in one shot. He was so unassailably powerful, and he's camped out and besieged Jerusalem. Verse 2. And the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the articles from the temple of God. These he carried off to the temple of his God in Babylonia and put in the treasure house of his God. Unthinkable. God delivers his chosen people into the hands of a pagan king who was merciless. He'd butchered loads of people. He was incredibly powerful militarily, and even the precious objects from the temple. This is like Raiders of the Lost Ark. God allowed King Nebuchadnezzar to raid the articles of the temple, all those treasures, maybe the ark itself, who knows, all going into the service of a Babylonian god. It's unthinkable. Verse 3. Then King ordered Ashpenaz, chief of his court officials, to bring in some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility, young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after that they would enter the king's service. So here's a clever strategy. Many despots and empire and emperors have used this same strategy. Take some of the well-to-do families, reprogram their children so they become puppets and pawns for the empire. And by the way, while you're doing that, make sure you feed them well, treat them well, get them used to the kind of high life, and they will be yours. They will belong to you. We used to have a little puppy when we lived in Albania. Beautiful little dog. We nursed him back to health after he was in a car accident until he grew and he was safe. But we took him to the park. And when we took him to the park, we thought our loyal dog would stick with us forever. But no, anyone with a ham sandwich and he was theirs. But whatever you fed him meant he belonged to you if you fed him the good stuff. And that's how King Nebuchadnezzar thought he could win the hearts and souls and minds of some of these noble young men that had come from Jerusalem. But, verse 6, among them were some from Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. The chief official gave them new names. To Daniel, the name Belteshazzar. To Hananiah, Shadrach. To Mishael, Meshach. And to Azariah, Abednego. There you go. Their whole sense of who they were was being reprogrammed by the king. Oh, someone is phoning me. Just gonna... Their whole sense of identity was being reprogrammed by the king. He was going to feed them well. He was going to educate the Jewishness out of them and reprogram them to be Babylonians in a 3-year degree course in undergraduate studies of the magic and mystery of the Babylonians. And he was even going to give them new names. Can you see, how were these young men going to know who they were? They were far away from their structures and their normal life. How were they going to stay faithful? How were they going to hold on to their sense of identity? This is a challenge many of us are facing right now in lockdown. Everything is different. And yet, how can we hold on to who we are and who we're supposed to be in the sight of God? It's something I wrestle with a lot, and Daniel's book can help us. Did you notice that Daniel was given the name Belteshazzar, but the book is still called Daniel? Somehow Daniel held on to enough of who he was that he's able to stay faithful to himself, but also to his God. Verse 8. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself in this way. Now, that's interesting, isn't it? In what way was Daniel going to defile himself by drinking wine or food? Is it because it was involving pork meat, or were there other kind of kosher breaking laws that were involved here? We're not clear about that, because Daniel did say what he would eat. Have a look. Verse 9. Now God had caused the official to show favour and sympathy to Daniel. But the official told Daniel, I am afraid of my lord the king, who has assigned your food and drink. Why should he see you looking worse than the other young men of your age? The king would then have my head because of you. Daniel then said to the guard, whom the chief official had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, please test your servants. For 10 days, give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance with that of the young men who eat the royal food, and treat your servants in accordance with what you see. So he agreed to do this, and he tested them for 10 days. So Daniel says, I won't eat your fine meats, I won't drink your wine, but I will drink your water and your vegetables. Now some people say, oh look, this is a clever little weight loss system, do the Daniel fast. It's true, I've become a vegetarian just before lockdown because of ethical reasons for the environment. But I think what was going on here was Daniel was saying, look, I am willing to go so far with accommodation to what I'm being asked to do. I have very little power. You know, I don't get to choose whether I get to live in Jerusalem or I live in Babylon. That's been decided for me. I've been taken into captivity. I can't even tell you that I refuse the name that you are going to give me. I can't even tell you that I don't want to study the course that you want me to study. I can't even opt out of this kind of civil service fast track that you've got me on for the Babylonian government. I can't opt out of any of those things, but I will draw a line. This is my line of resistance, and I won't cross it. I won't eat what you tell me to eat because I want to stay faithful to my God. As I read it, I don't think this was about the kosher laws. I think this was about whether Daniel could keep his heart belonging to God rather than be seduced into a puppet relationship with all that was powerful and high and mighty about King Nebuchadnezzar's administration. He says, I won't cross this line. I won't compromise. You see, Daniel had such a sense of who he was and who God was that he wouldn't cross that line. I don't know if you noticed it, but the sovereignty of God, or God's ultimate power, is being displayed in this passage. Two things we said. Firstly, that God allowed Nebuchadnezzar to take the people of Israel into captivity in Babylon. That was God's plan. This isn't just an accident of history. This isn't just about military might. This is God allowing some form of punishment on his nation because they'd neglected the poor and they'd gone after other gods. But secondly, even in the middle of that punishment, God was still sovereign and had given favour to Daniel in who was looking after him when it came to the food and drink. And so that offer of test me for 10 days was accepted by the chief official in charge of them. Verse 15, at the end of the 10 days, They looked healthier and better nourished than any of the other young men who ate the royal food. So the guard took away their choice food and the wine they were drinking and gave them vegetables instead. That's a tough call, isn't it? It's hard giving up meat. It's hard giving up fine wines. For some of us in lockdown, meat and fine wine is what is getting us through this thing. But Daniel, despite all the hardships he was facing, felt that he needed to make this decision, this tough decision, because he wanted to stay faithful to God. Friends, I don't know what lockdown's doing to your brain. I don't know what it's doing to your heart. But what is it doing with your connection with God? Do you still trust him, even though life's really different? So how will we follow in Daniel's footsteps of being faithful to God first, above all others, no matter what is happening to us in lockdown, no matter how the pressure on us to change who we are and who we're faithful to is on us? How will we stay faithful? Where do we need to draw a line? What are the things that we'll say, I can't change anymore, I have to stop here in order to be faithful to God? That, for me, is the challenge for this passage. To these 4 young men, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning, and Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. At the end of their time set by the king to bring them in, the chief official presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and he found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the king's service. In every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his whole kingdom. And Daniel remained there until the first year of King Cyrus. Daniel was taken with his friends into captivity. They tried to reboot him, reprogram him, eradicate his personality and imprint on him a new one. But Daniel resisted. Daniel resisted by his food, but mainly Daniel resisted by setting his heart aside for God. And when he did that, God blessed him. And God used him as an incredible instrument to bring challenge and influence and sometimes encouragement to King Nebuchadnezzar. And at the end of the day, Daniel outlasts King Nebuchadnezzar. By the time Daniel's ministry is over, there's a new king in town, King Cyrus. And we're going to see, as we go through the rest of this week, how Daniel shows us a different way to live out a faithful life under difficult circumstances. There's so much truth and wisdom in here that's going to help us in lockdown. But the thing today, I think, is to focus on identity. Daniel maintained his identity as a child of God under extreme pressure. And whatever they tried to reprogram, whatever they tried to reboot into his head, he stayed faithful to God. Friends, I think we need that Daniel spirit about us, don't we? That no matter how much this lockdown feels like it's pressing us in and changing who we are and adapting us, we want to say, no matter what external pressures are on us, we will stay faithful to our God, whatever the cost. Friends, that's my prayer. That's my ambition. What are some of the tips that you've got? What are some of the ideas that you've got of how we can follow in Daniel's footsteps? I'd love to hear from you. Please drop me a line on Facebook, or on Instagram, or on YouTube. And tune in again tomorrow when we face chapter 2 of Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Come back tomorrow for Faith and Quarantine. Thank you.